Hello everybody, what's up? Today is Monday, September 18th, 2023. This is going to be an AMC update for the week. I want to apologize, I did an update over the weekend. I actually recorded a video and everything, and I didn't post it. I'm not going to be referring to that video I just wanted to know that basically like I just dropped the ball. I had it done and I was going to edit a few things, and then I ended up running out of time. But let's just jump right into it. Let's get out on the week with some strength here. So, in our at least in our analysis. So basically, this set up almost exactly like the previous one. There's almost no difference. There was a series of up thrusts here, specifically the one on Monday and Tuesday, and then another one into Wednesday, Thursday. When we started the week, I said, really the only way this is going to end well for us right now is if we come back above 1080, and that's kind of the hope for the week, right? But everything else about this is very similar to what happened previously. Now, there's a couple differences that are pretty key. You'll notice that the volume is indeed much higher in this range right here. You'll also notice that we did jump over, if you see this white line coming down, this is the initial downtrend. We did jump over that with that big burst that happened going into Thursday. However, and I mentioned it on Discord during the week, this particular setup still has a lot of the same problems that this one did, which is that you have this initial sign of weakness. So you get a buying climax, you come above the buying climax, and then you immediately have a sign of weakness. You get a buying climax, you come above the buying climax, you immediately have a sign of weakness. Now, from that point forward, the differences are enough that you would take notice, right? So, obviously, this range sets up pretty low, and it kind of climbs up and just barely peaks above the buying climax again, closed beneath it, and then you got this massive sell-off, right? And remember, we're still within that range here. And also, if you want to just kind of look at the big picture here, you'll see that this is more or less just an ascending triangle, right, or a bear flag in the end. And we don't really, we have something that looks similar to that here, but if you look at the actual patterning, you can see that the channel that it's in, which I've gotten these kind of bolder white lines, is broken, and it was broken on Thursday. And what it really looks like to me in the end, when you remove that channel, is it just looks like a widening spread. So unlike what we saw up here, which was very much a narrowing spread, what we see here on lessening volume as it's pushing up is we have a pretty heavy volume distribution going on the top here with a lot of these massive spikes. We've got a widening spread, which oftentimes can indicate a change of direction, but the idea here is it just looks like a big shakeout, right? So you've got a shakeout, and then ultimately, my big thing this week was we need to come back above. This past week was we need to come back above 840, and I laid it out on Discord. It's in the feed. I need to do better about putting it in the actual TA channel, because I think a lot of people, they come and go right on the Discord and they don't see that, and that's not very good. Like, that's kind of irresponsible on my part, because if folks are looking for that information, they shouldn't have to dig through hundreds of comments to find it. But I talked about coming back above 840 and needing to stay there, and we just didn't do it. We pushed above it. We sold through it almost immediately on Thursday. It went down and filled that gap, and then the next support, which is the previous LPS here at 797, once again, you have a sign of weakness, push beneath it, and then this time when it comes back up to 840, it just cannot. It's like it's a clear UTAD kind of setup where you've got this push up above the resistance 2 times before a sell-off. Now, I say UTAD, and I'm assuming that means that this is a distribution. There are some differences between a distribution and a reaccumulation that happens to happen repeatedly during an ascending accumulation. And you guys are like, well, that was a lot of words. Word salad. Well, an ascending accumulation is kind of like what we had in March, and it is a real thing. You can go look it up in Wyckoff, and it's basically just looks like a bear flag, to be very honest with you, and most people would call it as a bear flag. And if you recall what happened way back in March, that's a really good example. That's why I use it a lot. And I'm talking about March of 2021. And I use that example a lot because it's just a very clean example of an ascending accumulation where you'll get these push-ups, relatively high volume push-ups, but then they kind of meander and the volume drops off, and then it happens repeatedly. And the one thing that separates that from a distribution is there's less volatility usually in the overall push-up. You don't have this kind of dropping off volume type deal, and you don't have these crazy distributive spikes. Not really. But what you often do have is you often have some pullbacks that go back and retest the creeks, but they don't lose the creeks. And that's the big difference between any kind of an ascending accumulation that you might see and let's just say, so let me see if I've got it pulled up here. I thought I did. It doesn't look like I do. Yeah, it doesn't look like I do. All right, never mind. I was going to have the March example pulled up, but let's just not bother because it's a lot of work. And frankly, it does look very similar to this, okay? But the big difference is that when it gets back to this top range and it goes back down, it doesn't lose any of the creeks that it's jumped. Now, you might be saying, well, what exactly constitutes a creek in this case? Well, remember, a creek is anywhere you have pushed up against resistance, and then even if you pull back, once you jump that resistance, you're kind of looking at the tops, right? So sometimes you might be looking at local tops. You might be saying, well, this is where it pushed up resistance. This is where it came back down, and then this is where it hits it again, and then you see it find support at that same spot right over here. And this is just like an example of one where you could say, like, sure, that could be a creek potentially that needs to be retested. You could look at the steeper creeks, which could be like a trend line. Again, where is it pushed out resistance? When does it come back to check that resistance, breaks out? Does it ever come back? Those are the questions you want to ask. And an ascending accumulation, if it's healthy, doesn't ever come back down through the creeks. It can, however, make a new low, and that there's a difference. So that would be like what we're doing right now, where you've come down and you've made a new low compared to the last previous two supports. That's not impossible in an ascending accumulation as long as it doesn't break the creeks, because there is such a thing as a throwback, which is going back down to a creek to try to find some buyers and things like that. So the question you're going to want to ask is, well, is that what's going on right now? I think the answer is just, unfortunately, I think tentatively the answer is no, but I'm going to give it a grain of salt here, because while I do see there's a possibility that this is an ascending accumulation, this particular setup right now is a widening, right? And there's only a couple things that really make me think that this might go really strongly towards the bull side, and it really has to do with RSI and the setup on the whole, because you'll notice that when we look and we zoom out a bit, I'm not even going to look at the price action, but we look at what's going on with the RSI. It's pretty consistently making higher lows here as we're coming down. There's a strong divergence on the higher time frames. If you go up to like 1 hour, you can see this in like two bottoms, and it's making a higher low. If you go out to like the weekly, for example, it's very strong divergence at this point. As long as there's a bottom in the near future, this is very clearly divergent right here. And the last time we had that was way back from 2017 to the bottom in 2020. And you could see it didn't result in an immediate run to the upside, but eventually it worked its way back out. And yes, I think that's a very strong indication that you're going to have a strong reaction here as long as this finds a bottom. So on the higher time frames, I think we're kind of looking at this, and it seems like it would demand sort of a higher reaction, a stronger reaction. On the lower time frames, a bit of a mixed bag. You've got, in some cases, some wiggle room where I think you could easily make a correction back down. You do have divergences. I'm on the 1 hour right now, where it does seem like it's kind of turning back up. While the stock price has been slowly coming down, the RSI has been turning back up. But there's still room to come down. So there's a bit of a mixed dynamic here. I think on the higher time frames, you're not going to see much lower lows on the RSI. I'm willing to bet, unless this thing drops to like $1 or $3, which is not out of the question, I'm just saying, unless it drops like that significantly, I don't think that the weekly is going to become significantly more oversold than it already has been. I think the divergence is probably going to continue just based on the trends that we're seeing. That's my thought. So on higher time frames, like the 4 hour, for example, you can see that divergence really clearly between the bottoms that we had on August 28th and the bottoms that we had back here on September 7th. There's clearly a strong divergence at this point in the RSI. It's very low, it's staying very low, but ultimately the lower or the higher lows are appearing on the RSI, and that would tell you that there's a probable breakout imminent on the higher time frame. But that doesn't mean that on lower time frames you can't come back down. And we need to get through this kind of period of shakeout, and we need to make a solid bottom. So what we're really dealing with right now in my mind is we're dealing with a competition between the big picture and the small picture, because I think on the big picture, you could make an argument that we need to come back down a little bit more, maybe to the 630 area, maybe to 650, because that particular region signifies that kind of 50%, as you saw in those stripe patterns. And I talked about that in the last bigger video I did, setup video. I'm not going to go through that right now, but it's roughly right here. On the smaller time frames, you can see that, yeah, we jumped this creek and we didn't really check it. And a lot of times what happens on AMC is we get that early reaction maybe with that hook, but then we end up with this kind of like curtain roddy. So that ends up being like part one of a cat ear formation or whatever. And then we get this curtain roddy drop. And we'll see what happens with this. I went ahead and extended the creek with this yellow line, and it is checking it this morning. Again, I don't have a lot of faith that that's going to hold necessarily. But this is sort of the way that the setup would work if it's an ascending accumulation, is you won't break either of these two, and specifically you wouldn't come back beneath this white one. But here's the problem, right? The longer it took to go sideways, right, and build up, frankly, a bearish cause here, the farther down you're likely going to go. And even if this drops straight down to check this creek right now, you're going to end up with a lower low. So I'm not going to hold my breath and say that, yeah, I think this is going to just reverse. The situations in which that do happen involve an early jump of this particular trend right here. It comes off this cat ear formation, and it would need to happen sooner than later. And I think what's maybe most likely here is it comes down to, let's say, that 745. So this would be the place that I'd be looking for a possible reaction back to the upside. But again, even here, like, I'm not really going to hold my breath for it, but it would have to be like a pretty significant push, right? And then it ends up having to come all the way back up and have a really strong breakout to the upside. This should look familiar to you because this is often exactly how AMC likes to break out. But again, you just take it for what it is, right? You've got really high volume and a lot of these major up thrusts right here at the tops. There is a significant setup here that's kind of this widening. Bukowski target wise, that would bring you back down towards the bottom of that widening at least. I think we jumped this creek and then didn't check it quickly enough. It doesn't have to be checked if this were, again, to be bullish, but we got to see that evidence first. And thus far, all we've seen is a breakdown. We've seen the cat ear formation here with the distribution and the breakdown. So it is what it is. That's all there is to it. So for the weekly outlook, I've got my eye on a couple different spots, but I think we're either going to do what I said here with that reversal, and it would have to be a bear trap. So when you think about probabilities, think about that and think about it in terms of like which direction are we going, and how probable is it that we just turn right back around all of a sudden, right? Is it possible? Sure. Is it possible this has a pretty massive retracement today? Sure. But keep in mind that even if it does come back up, you still have to hold the support and break back above the 840 mark and then hold above it. So there's a lot of like requirements to turn back to the bull side. So I wouldn't be like trying to catch a knife here. What seems more probable to me is a softer rejection early in the day, and then what seems more probable to me is that then we'd come back down and start heading back towards lows. And I think that, yeah, it might mean that we come back down towards 7 in the end. If this were to hold above 745 at any point in the future, I might be inclined to think that we're going to have an LPS, but it would need to be a very obvious reversal pattern, meaning like it has to be something that's clearly bullish. It can't be wishy-washy. And a lot of the problem with the recent setups here with these guys coming down is that they've been very, what I would say is wishy-washy. Like, oh, this is kind of bearish, this is kind of bullish, this is kind of bearish, this is kind of bullish. Instead of just being very clearly one thing or the other, right? So I don't like that. And I think that when this thing makes a definite bottom, it's going to be a bottom that smart money wants to buy into. Okay, so right now, all I'm gonna see right now is these really high volume peaks, 1, 2, 3. I think it's gonna be a widening that kind of breaks down towards the bottom target, and until we see it kind of shake out all the sellers, or have a dramatic trap kind of reversal, I don't think that we're gonna just immediately run. Once we do start moving, the main target for me is that 1080 mark. I think if we can get back above 1080, we'll be in really good shape, because that could present us with a really strong reversal that we need. And remember, those higher time frames are absolutely ready to go. So it's just kind of a waiting game, unfortunately. There's not much else to say about it. In terms of everything else going on, I'm happy to say that we've got some really good people that are in our Discord doing TA. Folks like Riley, who've come in and, stepped up quite a bit in recent days, and he does excellent Elliott Wave. In my opinion, he's probably the best that you can get from our standpoint for free, and he does that because he's just a good guy, I guess, and he wants to help out. There's also Ivan in our Discord. Ivan's TA is also really top-notch. He's not as active necessarily on stuff like AMC, but he does a lot of really great call-outs. So if you do follow him, you're going to probably get some pretty good trades out of that. And then on the whole, I just want to say that, I'm working on things that are kind of new and different. I was working on a NR7 setup video, and this is kind of confusing, but it's maybe when you're just kind of briefly looking at it. But NR7 is narrow range, 7 bars pattern, and it's a very accurate pattern if you do it right. The breakout targets for it are kind of tricky, so like the breakout model for it, I should say, is kind of tricky, like knowing when the breakout is actually successful. But this is kind of cool, and so this is what I've been working on. But it's a reversal pattern that can tell you when the stock's about to turn, which is pretty neat. And you can see it's not like perfect. There's times where you might get false signals, but the breakout is determined by the range, not by that particular candle pattern appearing. So it's pretty specific. So like an NR7 here would be, you'd count 7 back, and then you would look at plus or minus 1 or 2, I guess, days in this case, because it dropped afterwards. But you would look at essentially a couple days before and maybe a couple days after. And you look at that range and you see when does it break that range. And it broke the range here in an after hours move. You couldn't predict that. But that gives you the signal to buy. Whereas something like this, it's a little more complicated, because you can tell that in the end, this signaled a reversal. But in terms of like the range breakout, it hasn't even come close, because you need to count back 7 and then end up doing that range and seeing when it breaks. And it only ever broke down right here. So that it would be a breakdown, and you would have bought short. You wouldn't actually have bought this up. So it's a little weird. But I feel like it's a really strong one, and there's some really cool stuff that you can do with it, and I'm going to look more into it. And that's specifically Bukowski. He bases one of his best indicators that they've made on it. And I think it's a really cool, interesting pattern that I'm looking into right now. So as soon as I kind of like wrap my brain around it completely, I'm going to try to like make a video about that so you all can benefit from that. That's what I've been working on lately. So anyways, I have a lot going on. I'll try to see if I can get another video out this week, maybe midweek or end of the week. I feel like this week is going to be pretty important in the grand scheme of things. whether we get an LPS or that drops to the new low, it really doesn't matter. I think it's going to be a pretty important week for us. I really think that this is coming to a head here. Just doesn't seem like there's much room to go, or much more time to go, I should say, before we see something pretty big. So anyways, I hope you all have a good one, a great week, and I will talk to you later.